walkwards, waywards, wade in courses of expansive deepenings of the soul, in which things enter and are integrated, not just consumed, but integrated and become part of us, and in some sense are always part of us, but at the same time not. And when we consider the separation of these things, there can be a relief in getting rid of some aspects of what is really discomforting internally, and just getting it out of our system. But at the same time, recognizing that these are all natural processes, and that we're all part of a single spiritual, overarching, unified system of a set of laws and dynamics that govern every aspect of our existence, and which require things like validation and validity to sustain any sort of conceptualization or interpretation or symbol or representation. And the symbolic message is for the interpreter to intimately forge their own subjective conscience in its proximal relations to that, and really to stimulate something of conscience, not just interest, but something more deeper than that. And interest is an essential element, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of complicated emotions that are necessary as well, that occur concurrently with that, and that really complexify it and give it a richness to it. Color, not just color, but a texture and a pattern, what it feels like directly through that sense perception, but not just the sense perception, the transduction of that information. And it's part within our total experiential atmosphere, in its passing by of things, and the subtle shifts in temperature which are associated with that, and give a full figure to our form, modeling what is ultimately really comforting and kind to us, kind in its all possible wanderings, which have the mysteries that are held within every bit of information possible, that can fill up the libraries of the neurons, which storage hosts all aspects of our psychological processings and constitution, which is how we characterize any aspect of our lives and even tell the story in a meaningful way. And without some sort of sense of what's meaningful, and not just meaningful but functional, and these functional objective laws and these dynamics to our existence, without a true objective coming to of that, there's a real loss that could otherwise benefit each potential moment in which it's absent, in which the presence of our mind or the wakefulness of what is good within our conscience and the pleasantness to be found there and to be had within its incremental gratifications or all its potential variants, be it satiating or satisfying, or even cultivating a deeper sense of appreciation, which is much more complex and pertains more to our virtues and understanding things much more deeply than in terms of its pricing or its worth and deeming it this or that, but to truly recognize and appreciate the value that's bestowed upon us through what we appreciate and connecting that meaningfully to the self. And appreciation has more to do with this direct, meaningful engagement of our emotions, all possible meaningful emotions that imbue a sense of purposefulness, and which is unique and typically pertains to individual differences, but which we can grow wiser through the leadership of appreciation, which really role models the character and characterization of excellence, giving us a blueprint to work with and to model ourselves in relation to the highest grandeur possible, that supplies us with not just concepts or ideas, the subject matters of ideations and the imaginal, but much more in terms of putting that imaginal process to ground, an innovative ground, physical ground, objective ground, that allows us to move from the space that is operating within the abstract domain of our own heads and incongruent with the objective rather than congruent with it. And this is important because we can be in a subjective space, but when we apply that to something that is incongruent from what is true within that domain, it always pertains to an objective synthesis in regards to truth. And if the alignment between what's objective and subjective is disproportional, so that it's incongruent and it does not align, the thoughts in our head does not align with what's actually the case or what is true in a matter of fact, this is what produces great suffering and pain, through creating imperfections and detachments from, ironically, these sources of attachment that we have to our own subjectivity, and an attachment that attributes that subjectivity to something as being subjectively true, as objectively true, but it only really pertaining to, it's subjectively true to you, and it could be meaningful to you or meaningless to you. That's up to you, and that's through primarily your worth deeming and attributions of it and failure to appreciate what's meaningful in its more true manifestations, and a true sense of appreciation that recognizes objectivity and why something truly matters and is to be appreciated, to recognize the good in things, in experiences, and to do so earnestly, not necessarily with what's said or stated aligning, say, to the objective matter, but it aligning to the psychological truth. and the structure of that, what validates that, what constitutes that, and that tends to be more complex and pertains to these individual differences as well as universal attributions that generally categorize and represent what tends to be fair and upholds positive physical health and psychological functioning, but most importantly, a healthy subjectivity and the health and well-being of our subjective experiences, in which we recognize each other as having an individual conscience through an innate theory of mind that allows us to empathize and recognize the complex emotional lives of individuals who all are characterized by these volitional psychological processes, but also automatic psychological processes that we sometimes aren't aware of, or that influence our behaviors indirectly, and which is not something to be finger waving and punitive towards, but rather to bring recognition and increase the enlightenment within our surrounds that pertains to self-knowledge, ultimately, and our capacities to increasingly become more masterful of the self and regulate the self without having to impede another's conscience or impose on their autonomy and volition, which is sacred and necessary for upholding what's ultimately great.